Well, good morning and good afternoon, and welcome to the June 2023 WASDE Review webinar. My name is Andy Miller with DTN. I'll be your moderator today. With me, as always, is Todd Hultman, Lead Market Analyst for DTN. Just a couple of quick things. During the event, all participants will be in listen-only mode, but we do encourage you to ask questions. To do this, click on the chat icon located in the bottom right of your screen. It'll open a messaging panel where you can write and direct your message to the webinar panelists. We will address all those questions at the end of the session after Todd finishes sharing his report. And one last point, we are recording this session, and we will have a rebroadcast link of this within the next 48 business hours on DTN.com. So that's the housekeeping. I'm going to turn it over to Todd.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Again today for another WASDE webinar. This June WASDE report typically is not a big mover. We didn't expect USDA really to make any adjustments to the production estimates for corn and soybeans, as they often don't this time of year when it's so early. And the irony or the twist of that this year, of course, is that we're already in a weather market when it comes to corn and soybeans. We've got such dry concerns across so much of the Corn Belt, so many areas that need rain. And unfortunately, we won't see any recognition of that in this report anyway. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and dig in and see what that USDA said for today's two reports. We'll start with corn as usual, and as we usually do, we'll go to the U.S. balance sheet for corn, just starting in the left column, which is the old crop season, or the season that we're currently in up until August 31st. We go to the bottom and we see that USDA made an adjustment to the ending stocks estimate. They increased it 35 million bushels to 1.452 billion bushels. That was slightly more than expected, but really pretty close to expectations as far as the market's concerned. There were technically two changes to the old crop ledger here, but the main one was a 50 million bushel reduction in the export estimate. It's now down to 1.725 billion bushels. Personally, I thought there was room to go 75 again, but USDA decides to go down 50 million bushels. Corn export sales, as you probably know, have really been dragging this year and are well below last year's pace, and we'll look at that a little closer in a minute. The other item that was reduced was the import estimate of corn, down to 25 million bushels. So between those two items, the ending stocks estimate was increased to 35 million bushels, giving us an average farm price estimate of $6.60. Now moving to the far right column, that is where we see the newest estimates of the new crop season. And if you look from above, they're still estimating 92 million planted acres. They're still estimating yield at 181.5. So as I say, there's no adjustment or recognition for the dry weather concerns that we're already well into here in early June. The production estimate was kept at a record high 15.265 billion bushels, and all the demand estimates were kept the same as a year ago. So the only thing that happened was the carryover from the old crop season increased by 35 million bushels, and that increased our ending stocks estimate for the new season by the same amount. So that number is now up to 2.257 billion bushels, USDA giving that a farm price estimate of $4.80. Now in the margin to the right, I just did a quick little penciled in math there for us, and just to say, what if instead of a 181.5 yield, USDA was looking at a 178 yield, and I didn't note it up there, but I'm using 90 million acres for corn. Well, in that scenario, just to give you an idea of if this dry weather concern gets much worse, we're looking at a 14.6 billion bushel crop, and you take that down to the bottom line, and instead of ending stocks around 2.3 billion bushels, now we're looking at 1.5, which is pretty close to where we're at in the current situation. So just to give an idea of what this means to price is if we knock a few bushels off the trendline yield that USDA started with, we're back to a similar scenario that we saw this year, which means that we'd be looking at corn prices in the upper fives and maybe even low sixes, depending on how it played out. But obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty ahead and a lot we don't know about weather and just how this is going to turn out. And I know you'll keep close attention to our meteorologist team, and they've explained that this has been a very tough season with La Nina gone now. There's not a real strong weather influence, and so the forecasts are really have been tough to pinpoint. We're supposed to have a broad coverage of showers come through this weekend, starting in the western plains and moving across to the eastern corn belt. We'll just have to wait and see how much rain and coverage is actually in that. So here we have a USDA estimate that's a little bit behind the curve when it comes to where the market is currently at already. The world estimates for corn, just starting with the old crop sheet, the only thing I wanted to point out here were the South American crop estimates were changed today. For Argentina, that corn estimate was knocked down 2 million metric tons down to 35, but they took those 2 million metric tons and added them to Brazil. So Brazil's production estimate increased to 132. So we have a push there between the two countries. I have to say I'm surprised to see USDA go up to 132 already. Local estimates have been more around like 127. So the USDA seems to think that there's more potential for this crop. I also want to note that our meteorologist, John Brannick, is watching Brazil very carefully, and he's concerned about a cold front coming through next week. And he said it's too difficult to call right now and too early to pinpoint just how low the temperatures will get. But there is sometimes a freeze risk to Brazilian corn in June, and he'll be watching to see if that develops early next week. Overall, in the upper right corner, the ending stocks estimate for world corn did not change much. 297.55 was just up slightly, hardly worth mentioning really from last month's estimate. So not much change there except for the two Argentina and Brazil estimates, which offset each other. Now looking at the new crop estimates, so this is the corn crop that's now being or been planted here in the U.S., and it includes the Northern Hemisphere. And for Argentina and Brazil, this would be the crop that would be planted in the fall. So it's we're looking pretty far forward on these estimates. But USDA increased their ending stocks estimate for corn in the upper right corner to 313.98, so almost 314 million metric tons. That was just slightly more than expected, about 1 million metric tons more than expected. Similarly, when we look at the ending stocks estimate for the world excluding China, that was also increased 1 million metric tons up to 109.68. So a little higher expectation for the new crop season. Overall, comparing the new corn season to the old corn season, or the season that we're currently in, USDA is expecting world corn production to be up 6% from a year ago, and they're expecting demand to be up 4% from a year ago. But again, we're already finding problems here in the U.S. Early on, so it seems likely that those corn production estimates will get trimmed lower. Here's the comparison of world ending corn supplies when we exclude China, which I think is the more accurate metric to watch. And going by USDA's current estimate, they're looking for ending stocks of 4.32 billion bushels of corn excluding China. That's the green bar on the chart, and that would be the most in 5 years. So looking for a fairly comfortable supply situation as far as world corn production goes. But again, there's a lot about that new year we don't know yet. Corn exports, this has been one of the big disappointments of the current old crop season. As of June 1, we only have shipped 1.25 billion bushels of corn. That's down a third from a year ago. So the red line's where we're at, the green shading is where we were a year ago, and the black line is the 4-year average. So we're well below both of those comparisons. And of course, the main problem has been that last year Brazil had a record crop and they had cheaper corn, and we lost out on exports for a long time. We had a little flurry of activity in March when China started buying, and it looked like maybe we'd had some hope to pick things up. But corn prices in Brazil are still cheaper than they are in the U.S. FOB prices are cheaper, and as mentioned, USDA just increased that Brazilian corn estimate up to 132. So it looks like when harvest gets here, more in the thick of things in about the month of July, just a month or so ahead of us, there's going to be a lot more competition again. So the outlook for our U.S. corn exports has really been beat up this year, and you can see that on this chart. Corn basis has been just stellar. You know, we've talked for a long time that it's been the strongest basis in well over 20 years. And of course, we've seen that throughout the country, and especially in the Western Corn Belt where the corn supplies were short. They suffered a lot of drought last year, and livestock guys had a lot of needs. We're short on hay, and we're paying $8 a bushel for corn through much of the winter. Well, that whole basis situation is starting to soften or weaken, as you can see a bit on this chart. Right now, our corn index at DTN for the country is at 634 last night. That's 24 cents above the July futures contract. We're now below the 2013 level, so we're not the strongest in 20 years anymore. And the thing I think it's important to notice on here is all the other lines, which are a little bit more than 20 years worth of basis history on this chart, you see several of them when you get to about mid to late June start to dive precipitously. And that's the concern, because we're going from a tight supply situation. And by the way, you see that in the 2013 line, which is the strongest basis at this point, kind of that purple color. And that took a dive in the end of June in 2013. And of course, that's another year where we went from a very tight supply situation to then having a larger corn crop by fall and more ample supplies. Now, again, I'll try not to mention it too much, but there is a lot of weather risk in this market right now. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But overall, it does appear that we are transitioning from a tight supply situation to a more comfortable supply situation. It's just a matter of how big that harvest is going to be this fall. And so don't expect to see that corn basis the strongest in 20 years again, probably, as we move through these summer months. Here's the December corn chart as of last night, and I just wanted to point out that technically speaking, we're still in a downtrend. We've had a nice rally from mid-May as the dry weather situation got a little more appreciation in the market. But as far as the trend goes, we really haven't done anything exceptional here to break resistance. So we pushed up the 1 month range a little bit, which is the green line, but we're still well short of the blue line, which is the 100-day average, and comes into play just below $5.60. So yes, there has been a correction. There's been some acknowledgement, and as you look at the non-commercial bars on the lower part of the chart, we went from a market where the specs were heavily long back in February, and then as the market started breaking new lows and falling lower, a lot of those specs got out of their long positions. In early May, specs actually went net short, which is pretty aggressive to do so, and got caught a little bit, because when the market got to roughly $5 and then turned higher on the dry weather, now we've seen the specs starting to cover some of those shorts. So a couple weeks ago, they were short over 62,000 contracts. Now they're net short just 20,000 contracts. So as often happens when the specs go short, they often overdo it, and that's what they got caught in here. This is obviously the time of year when a summer rally can develop. It's not unlike, it's not new or unique to have hot and dry weather in a summer, but it certainly is unique to be this dry this early in June. And I think that's what's causing a lot of the legitimate concerns that we have about prices ahead. So it's very tough to be the weatherman this year. The forecasts are very tough and change day to day. Don't seem to have a lot of stability or confidence in just how they'll play out. So it's a difficult market to call. But technically speaking, corn is still in a downtrend. It still hasn't proven any major change of direction yet from the initial idea that we're going to have a bigger crop this fall. So we'll see if the weather can disprove that or not in the days ahead. As far as the crop ratings for corn, this is from last Monday from USDA. You can see where the stress is the strongest. And of course, one of the biggest concerns is the state of Illinois was only 50% good to excellent. That's pretty rare for Illinois. They usually have a very good climate for corn there. But Missouri and Michigan showing some of the drier situations, but several major producing states they're being threatened. And even some of the states, even Nebraska says 63% good to excellent, but there's a lot of very dry areas in Nebraska and South Dakota that could use rain. So even in the 60s, they're not necessarily out of harm's way. The other thing to mention is it's just interesting to me that this is a bit of a flip from the pattern we've seen in recent years. We've seen largely the Eastern Corn Belt has been protected by rain and cooler temperatures for several years, while it's been the Northwestern Plains that really took the heat and the dryness. But this year is different in how much the Eastern Corn Belt is getting in on this one. So that's part of the concern here. Taking a look at soybeans, what did USDA say on this balance sheet today? Well, there's only one change to mention. It's on the old crop side, the left column, and we see exports reduced 15 million bushels, now down to 2 billion bushels. This one, it's not a big change, I'll acknowledge that, but it surprises me because really the old crop exports are doing quite well and shipments are above their estimated pace. We only need not very many soybeans ahead. I'll show a slide on that in just a second. But really, our old crop estimate is almost fulfilled. So I'm not sure why USDA reduced it in this report, but so be it. They did, and that increased the ending stocks estimate 15 million bushels. It's now up to 230 million bushels, which is still a tight supply situation for the summer months ahead until we get to the next harvest. On the new crop side, the far right column, again, no changes to the production estimates. They're still looking at a 52 bushel yield and a 4.51 billion bushel crop in the fall. That would be record production for soybeans if it came through. No changes on the demand estimates from last month, which is not uncommon. It's so early in the season, there's not a lot yet for USDA to go on. So we also saw a 15 million bushel increase in the new crop ending stocks estimate. That's now 350 million bushels, which is significantly larger than the current season we're in. But again, we have a lot to learn yet about the new season ahead. World soybeans, this is the old crop side. And again, I just want to direct your attention to the South American estimates. The ending stocks estimate for old crop beans just increased slightly, but the crop estimate for Argentina soybeans was reduced from 27 to 25 million metric tons. And if there's any surprise, I guess it's a surprise that Argentina's estimate didn't go lower. We're seeing local estimates in the 21 to 22 area. So for some reason, USDA seems reluctant to take it down farther just yet. It's hard to say exactly what that's about, but they did take 2 million metric ton off of their Argentina estimate. For Brazil, that soybean estimate was increased from 155 to 156, so they added 1 million metric tons there. And Paraguay was left unchanged at 8.8 million metric tons. So net overall, we lost 1 million metric tons of production on today's old crop estimate. Now let's take a look at the new crop estimate. And in the upper right corner, we see basically a slight increase from 122.5 to 123.3 million metric tons. So it's just not much of a change at all. It's slightly more than expected, but certainly not earth-shattering. And again, this is a season that has many, many months still ahead that we'll be watching. But just again to point out the comparison between the new season and the current season we're in, USDA is expecting world soybean production to be up 11% in the new season. And of course, a lot of that would come from Argentina rebounding from this year's drought. So they're looking for a big increase there. For total world soybean demand, they're expecting a 6% increase. So in USDA's view, there's going to be a lot more soybeans available in the new season ahead. Soybean exports, this is what I was talking about. As of June 1st, our soybean exports are just under 1.78 billion bushels. We're just only down 3% from a year ago, but keep in mind USDA is estimating exports to be down 7% from a year ago, and that's before they changed or lowered today's estimate by 15 million bushels. We only need 33 million bushels of more export sales between now and the end of August, so basically the next 3 months. If we can come up with 33 million bushels, we'll have enough to at least give exporters a chance to get everything shipped in time. So it doesn't look like there's any problem reaching that estimate. And again, I'm not sure why USDA cut that estimate today, but they did. Soybean crush premium. Oh, I should also mention, just this morning, we had an export sale of 7 million bushels of old crop soybeans from unknown destinations. So again, getting 33 million bushels doesn't seem too difficult. Now, looking at the other side of soybean demand is crush demand. And in that regard, we've seen a big change the past 3 months. The blue line at top is the value of soybean meal and oil that you get from crushing a bushel of soybeans. And back in early March, that was above $18 a bushel, but now it's $15.56 as of last night. So we've seen quite a reduction or a decline in the value of both meal and bean oil the last few months, whereas soybean prices also have come down, but not as rapidly as the products. And so the green line, the soybean crush premium, which is the amount of extra value that you get from crushing the soybean, has fallen from above $3 a bushel back in early March. And as of last night, it was $1.95. Just a week or so ago, it got down to its lowest level in almost 2 years. So part of that is because our soybean supplies are so tight this summer that the crush incentive needed to narrow to slow down the crush pace this summer to accommodate the lower amount of soybeans. But also we've had some recent pressure on soybean meal and bean oil. So meal's had a problem along with the hog market and the uncertain effects and bearish impact from Prop 12 in California. That's been weighing heavy, and hog producers have had a very unprofitable time so far this year, so that's hurt meal demand. And soybean oil has been waiting for EPA to come out with a better renewable volume obligation, which the renewable diesel industry needs to support the expansion that it has on the books. And we've seen big expansion the past year or more in the renewable diesel industry and in the demand for bean oil to make renewable diesel. But to keep that going, that industry needs help from EPA to support the expansion that they have in mind, and that's in question. That deadline's coming up June 14th, just next week, and we'll have to see what EPA says on that. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of coverage of that on DTN and in our market comments. The spec positions in soybeans, earlier this year, before March, basically, soybean or specs were heavily net long in soybeans. In fact, they had over 200,000 net longs in February. Now they're down to under 30,000 net longs as of May, and basically they've bailed out of their long positions as the market prices have come down, especially in November soybeans for the new crop. So they're getting down to a place where the specs won't present as much risk to the market, and that may be helping a bit as far as helping the recent rally that we've seen in soybean prices. As far as the basis, it wasn't that long ago, just back in April, we were seeing, some of the strongest basis levels for soybean that we've seen in many years. But that basis has been coming down the past couple months. And right now we're 35 cents below the July contract when we compare it with our DTN soybean index, which was $13.28 last night. So once again, as we're transitioning from a tight soybean supply situation to the anticipation of more soybean supplies at harvest time, and of course, we're also getting pressure, more competitive pressure now from Brazil after they just had a record crop. There is pressure on those cash prices to come down in relation to the futures board, and that's what we're seeing. So some of the good days and basis are behind us. On the November soybean chart, really similar to corn, we see quite a downtrend going on this year. We started breaking new lows in early March. That hasn't really stopped yet. And in fact, soybeans really has not had the as strong a rally on the dry weather concerns as corn has. And that's probably understandable because, soybeans can do pretty well through dry weather for a while until we get to August, and then they really need that moisture. And this is a more critical time for corn, but the market is just going along here with the idea that we're going to have bigger supplies, bigger harvest this fall. So weather, again, will have the final say, but right now this is a bearish market and it's difficult to convince otherwise. Now, old crop soybeans, we've seen more of a rally in, and of course, that's still a situation where we've got tight supplies this summer. So you're probably going to see some more volatility in the old crop side of soybeans. But as far as the new crop November contract, we're still pretty much locked into the view that we're going to have a bigger crop this fall. As far as the non-commercials or speculators in the market, we've seen a major liquidation of those positions since mid-April, especially this last down leg. A lot of those positions have gotten out. So along with that brings some of the risk out of the market as well. Soybean crop ratings, similar to corn, same dry areas. Illinois, a big concern, 51% good to excellent. Missouri and Michigan still looking very dry. But it's kind of unique to see the stress on the eastern side of the crop areas this year. So it's a much broader stress situation where the rain is needed. It's all about moisture, of course. No surprise and no secret there. And I think if there's one thing that's surprising to me about this topsoil moisture chart, which shows just how dry it is from Arkansas and Missouri to Michigan and Pennsylvania and Ohio, it's that, I was in Indiana just over a month ago, and it couldn't have been more plush. They had lots of snow and lots of rain through the winter and spring. It was just green and plush, and that was only maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago. And to see them turn, and the rivers were full. I mean, every river you drove over, it was up full on its banks. But to see it this dry this quickly has been a bit astonishing. All right, for wheat, Let's take a look at the U.S. balance sheet for wheat today. The exception here is that there was one tweak to the production side for wheat. They increased the yield in the far right column I'm looking, and that's the new crop estimate. They increased the yield by 0.2 bushels. Now they're up to 44.9 bushels an acre. So a slight increase there brings the production estimate 6 million bushels. So it's now 1.665. That's still a very small crop. And in fact, it's still in line to be the three smallest crops the past 3 years that we've seen in over 50 years. So this is still a small wheat harvest that we're looking at for the U.S. Ending stocks increased the 6 million bushel amount, now up to 562 million bushels, but keep in mind that's the lowest U.S. ending stocks estimate for wheat in 16 years. So that's going back quite a bit that we haven't seen supplies this tight. Unfortunately, we haven't seen a lot of demand with it, so that's been a tough situation also. The new winter wheat estimates came out from NASS today. It was increased slightly for all winter wheat. Last month they said 1.13 billion bushels. Oh, sorry, I have an MB, but it should be billion bushels for winter wheat. The new estimate, 1.136 billion bushels, just up slightly from last month, as I said. The HRW wheat estimate was increased 10 million bushels. It's now 525, but they brought down the soft red winter wheat by 4 million bushels to 402 and tweaked the white winter wheat 1 million bushels down to 209. So a little bit of an increase in the HRW wheat country, and I think I have a map. Yeah. So here's the winter wheat production estimated by USDA today. And it doesn't show the comparison to last month, but I can tell you that there was an increase in Oklahoma of about 4.4 million bushels, and there was an increase in Texas of about 4 million bushels, and that's where most of the increase came from. And of course, they had beneficial rains the last month, and evidently they found some fields that were good enough that could respond to the rain. Kansas wheat estimate production did not change with the rains from last month. 191.4 is the same production estimate as a month ago, so that might be a little surprising because they have seen a lot of nice beneficial rains, but as we noted, there was a lot of abandonment in the Kansas wheat tour, and a lot of that wheat there just beyond help, unfortunately. Just to point out some other changes, Nebraska, South Dakota, and Montana were all unchanged. Oregon, Washington were up slightly on their production estimates, and Ohio came down 1 million bushels. So pretty small tweaks, except for Oklahoma and Texas having some nice increases out of those recent rains that they received. The world estimates for wheat had a bit of a surprise today. So we've got some weather concerns starting to pop up. Northern Europe has been marked as dry. Russia's spring wheat areas are in need of rain. And we've heard about heavy rains in China that damaged some of their crop. But none of that showed up as a problem in today's report from USDA's estimates. China's production estimate is not on this table, but it was kept unchanged at 140 million metric tons, which is record production for China, by the way. That may come down in future estimates. We'll see. In today's report, three big producers showed some increases, and I have the rectangle on the second to the left column there. European Union, that crop estimate increased 1.5 million metric tons. That's larger than a year ago for European Union. Russia's crop estimate increased substantially from 81.5 to 85 million metric tons. That's still not as big as last year's 92 million metric tons. And then in Ukraine, that crop estimate increased 1 million metric tons up to 17.5. And of course, Ukraine's crop estimate is 1 million metric tons smaller than a year ago. If we look just to the right of that, those production estimates, we'll also see small increases in the export estimate. So 500,000 metric ton higher for Europe, 1 million metric ton higher for Russia, and 500,000 metric ton higher for Ukraine. So overall, USDA is presenting to us a new crop estimate where there's still a lot of competition for exports. Still going to be a very tough scenario for the U.S. to get much demand out of, and that's, I think, one of the concerns for wheat prices moving forward. In the upper right corner, we see the overall world ending stocks estimate for wheat was increased from 264 up to 270.7 million metric tons. So a bit of a boost there. And even the estimate when you exclude China was also increased by quite a bit, from roughly 125 up to 131. So just over a 6 million metric ton increase there. So that's USDA's early take. Again, we have a lot of season still in front of us, but that was a bit of a bearish view from USDA here on Friday. The just having given a perspective here of what the world wheat stocks excluding China look like. Today's new estimate is the green bar for the new crop estimate. It's 131 million metric tons, or 4.8 billion bushels, basically. And it's up from a year ago, and it's the second lowest total in 11 years. So not quite as tight as last year is what USDA is saying early on. The basis for HRW wheat, we've seen this basis go from a very strong position, kind of like soybeans, I guess. It went from a very strong position in April to where it's been on a steady decline since. Right now, we're 40 cents under the July market when we compare it to our national index at DTN. So that's weakened quite a bit since April. And I would say we're back basically in a more normal ground for HRW wheat. So the tight supply situation doesn't seem to have any exceptional effect on demand right now. And of course, that's been the current concern the past several months. For the July Kansas City wheat chart itself, it's kind of interesting to me. The green lines, you know, are the 1 month range, and we've basically stayed within that. We've punctured the lower end a couple times, but when they puncture the lower end, it's typically specs trying to go short, and in the short term anyway, every time they've tried to do that, they've basically failed and paid a price for it. So it appears that commercials are having a little bit of fun with them on trying to be as bearish, maybe as they are in Chicago wheat. I don't know, but the commercials have been able to at least lend some support to Kansas City wheat at these lower prices, better than what we see in the Chicago contract. But what you don't see here, obviously, is a real strong effort yet to break resistance. And we had a pretty good attempt in early May. We broke a new 1 month high, but it just couldn't last for more than a day, and we fell right back again. So wheat continues to be a difficult market where it seems like no matter what the news is out of Ukraine and what's happening with the war, the wheat prices just aren't responding. And as our colleague Kent Beadle said in an earlier word grain comment, when you have a market that just won't trade up on bullish news, that's usually not a good sign. I would say if there is any encouragement here, it is that commercials have at least been active on the lower end of the market in trying to lend support. But as far as pushing something higher, it's been very difficult to sustain any rally in wheat, unfortunately. So still continues to be a tough situation. In conclusion, I would basically call this report slightly bearish for all three crops today. It's slightly bearish, of course, that we know that the production estimates are likely to change in the future. And of course, the fact that they kind of ignored any weather problem today, which I understand they don't have a lot of flood evidence yet, and it's going to be a while before we even get into the fields, and you know, it's September before they actually get in the field and start looking at making yield estimates. But even with ignoring the the weather challenges that we have. They're still hanging on to the outlook for much larger ending stocks this fall, and that's very tough environment for both corn and soybean prices. On wheat, if we just looked at the U.S. side, it could be a bit encouraging that we're estimating the lowest stocks in 16 years. But again, you turn around and we got higher world production estimates this month coming from Europe, Ukraine, and Russia. So that continues to offer bearish pressure to the market. Before we head to questions here, I'll get to Andy in just a second, but I just wanted to point out on June 30th, we're going to have the acreage report and quarterly grain stocks. Those are two very important reports. That acreage report often is a game changer or sets the tone for the rest of the year, and it'll be interesting to see because I don't think we've really had a very good acreage report just yet. We did have some delayed planting problems in the northern plains, but it looks like they turned out pretty good when crunch time came. So with that, Andy, I'm ready for questions.
Well, as always, you've done a great job, so we don't have too many. I really just have one kind of general comment or question, I guess. Any insight on weather? And I know you touched on weather a little bit, mentioned La Nina. So any other additional thoughts on kind of where we think weather might be heading through the season?
Sure. And with that, I would refer you to John Brannick has done a number of blogs for us at DTN recently that have been very good. And I think he's been very good on trying to keep us very well informed on this. But as I mentioned, La Nina is not in force anymore. We're currently in a neutral situation as far as La Nina goes. And that actually makes it tougher for the weather guys to come up with a solid, confident forecast because now they're dependent on less dominant features in the weather pattern, and those less dominant features, when they're not as strong, then there's more variability in the weather. So we've seen rain forecasts that don't show up, or they turn out to be lighter than expected, or don't have the coverage that they've expected, and it's just a difficult environment to forecast in. So having said that, as I mentioned, we do have expectations for a front to develop and move through this weekend, which is expected to take some pretty decent coverage of rains from the western Corn Belt through to the eastern Corn Belt. And that's something we haven't seen in quite a while, where you actually have a front move all the way through. Now, Minnesota, northern Iowa, Wisconsin, part of the Dakotas, unfortunately, those areas are probably going to be missed this time around by that front, it looks like. However, now that a front has moved through, it looks like it might open up the door for more fronts to follow. And I just checked DTN's longer term forecast again yesterday, because they do update that from time to time. And there's, as far as rain chances go, they're still looking for a more active month in July and August. So, the big question is, can we get enough rains early enough in June to help us last to those better periods in July and August? So it's not easy to call. It's kind of tough to be an analyst when you have this kind of weather pattern going on. And I think, understandably, there's a lot of frustration in the country of a lot of dry spots that just aren't getting in on the rain. So it's a tough situation, and I wouldn't be surprised if we don't possibly get more of a summer weather rally in the corn and soybean price this summer from it. But lots of times you got to be careful. Those weather rallies don't last long, and they can be good opportunities, however, maybe to hedge or make forward sales if you get a chance to do that.
And a related question to that, Todd, how about these Canadian wildfires, and do we see any longer term impact from that?
Yeah, and this is where I'm a little out of my league, not being
right.
the weather guy, but I was just reading Philip Shaw's article on that today, Smoky and Dry, where he's been getting some of that smoke in Ontario, and it, I don't know what to tell you honestly on the weather impact of that. I can remember St. Helens, which was a totally different event, but kind of cooled down the summer temperatures for us for a little bit. But I would have to toss that one to John and let him try to answer that.
Sounds good. All right. Well, I'll say thank you to you for answering those questions, and I'll say thank you to everyone else because that really finishes up the list of questions we had. And I'll just give everyone a reminder that this session has been recorded, and we will put a rebroadcast link up within the next 48 hours. So you can check this out if you missed anything or want to grab it again. Also, Todd, I don't know if you want to advance one more slide. As always, Todd is generous to put his contact information. So if you'd like to reach out direct, there is the information. And I think that about finishes it up. So I'll say thanks one last time and wish everybody a great rest of your day and a great weekend. And thanks again for joining.
Thanks all.